The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with whispers and laughter. The great leaders of the galaxy, gathered from countless systems, were struggling to hold back their amusement. At the center of the room, a holographic image displayed the face of a man unfamiliar to most of them. He was no warrior, no royal figure, and certainly no diplomat. He was Ethan Vance, a human mechanic from the small mining colony of Ilara Prime. This human, one council member sneered, has been named the guardian of King Alvaron's only daughter. Surely, this is a joke. Another delegate chuckled. It's not a joke. It's an insult to the Seraphin legacy. The Seraphin were a proud and ancient race, known for their grace, intelligence, and unmatched elegance. To them, the idea that a human, a species seen as primitive and unrefined, could inherit such a responsibility was absurd. But while the council mocked, Ethan had no idea what awaited him. In his small workshop on Ilara Prime, he was busy repairing a starship engine. Grease smeared his hands and face, and the sound of tools echoed through the space. This was his life, quiet, predictable, and far removed from the politics of the galaxy. The door to his workshop slid open with a soft hiss, and Ethan glanced up. He froze. Standing in the doorway was a woman unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her pale blue skin shimmered faintly under the workshop lights, and her long white hair cascaded down her back like a river of silver. Her golden eyes held a mixture of curiosity and something else, something he couldn't quite place. "You are Ethan Vance?" she asked, her voice calm but commanding. "Oh, yeah, that's me," he replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "Who's asking?" "I am Lyra," she said, stepping further inside. She moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, her elegant figure out of place among the clutter of tools and machinery. "Daughter of King Alvaron, you have been named my guardian." Ethan blinked, certain he had misheard. "My what?" "Guardian," she repeated. "My father, before his death, invoked an ancient bond between our people. Your family owes me protection, as his final wish." Ethan laughed nervously, shaking his head. "You've got the wrong guy. I'm a mechanic, not a whatever you're looking for." Lyra's gaze didn't waver. "There is no mistake. The council has already been informed. You are my guardian now, whether you wish it or not." Before Ethan could process her words, a small device on her wrist projected a hologram. The image of King Alvaron appeared, a regal figure with the same pale blue skin and white hair as Lyra. His voice, though recorded, carried authority. "To the descendant of Ethan Vance, the message began. I entrust my daughter, Lyra. Protect her as your grandfather once protected me. In doing so, you will honor the bond between our worlds." The hologram flickered and disappeared, leaving Ethan speechless. His grandfather had died years ago, and the stories of his adventures had always seemed more myth than reality. Now, those stories were catching up with him. "I don't know what you expect from me," Ethan finally said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm no hero." Lyra tilted her head, studying him. "Perhaps not yet," she said. "But I believe my father saw something in your bloodline. Something unique." The words unsettled Ethan. Before he could respond, Lyra turned and looked around the workshop. "This place will do for now," she said. "But we have much to discuss. There is a summit in 2 days, and you will accompany me." "Summit," Ethan repeated, his voice rising. "What summit?" "The Galactic Council," she said simply. "And they will not be kind to you." As the door slid shut behind her, Ethan stared after her. A sinking feeling in his chest. He had inherited a responsibility he didn't want, from a man he never knew, to protect a woman who didn't seem to need it. And somewhere in the galaxy, powerful forces were already plotting his failure. Ethan's small apartment on Ilara Prime was a far cry from the luxury Lyra was used to. It was a cramped space filled with tools, half-finished projects, and the faint smell of engine grease. Lyra stood in the middle of the room, her golden eyes scanning the surroundings. She raised an eyebrow, as if struggling to process how someone could live like this. "This is where you reside?" she asked, her tone laced with both curiosity and disapproval. "Yeah," Ethan replied, tossing a bundle of wires onto a cluttered desk. "It's not much, but it's home. Make yourself comfortable, if you can find a spot." Lyra didn't sit. Instead, she moved cautiously, as though the clutter might leap up and attack her. Her elegant white gown brushed against the floor as she turned to face him. "Do you intend to present yourself to the Galactic Council as you are, covered in grease and living in this chaos?" Ethan sighed, already regretting agreeing to this arrangement. "Look, Princess, I didn't ask for any of this. I'm just trying to do my job and keep my head down." "Lyra," she corrected firmly. "You may address me as Lyra." Ethan shrugged. "All right, Lyra. But if you're expecting me to suddenly turn into some kind of polished diplomat, you're out of luck. I'm just a guy who fixes ships." "And yet," she said, stepping closer, "you are the one my father chose. Do you not find that curious?" Ethan frowned, her words striking a nerve. He had been asking himself the same question ever since she walked into his workshop. Why him? What could a simple mechanic possibly offer someone like her? "I don't know what your father was thinking," he admitted, "but if you're looking for a hero, you've got the wrong guy." Lyra studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps," she said finally, "but I do not believe in coincidences. My father's choices were always deliberate." Ethan opened his mouth to argue but stopped when a loud chime echoed through the room. Lyra glanced at a small holographic device on her wrist. Her face hardened. "What is it?" Ethan asked. "The council," she replied. "They've summoned us earlier than expected. They want to assess your suitability as my guardian." Ethan groaned. "Great. Let me guess. They're not exactly fans of humans." "Correct," Lyra said. "They see your species as unsophisticated. You will face ridicule, perhaps worse." Ethan leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. "Fantastic. Just what I needed." Lyra stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "You must understand, Ethan. This is more than a formality. If they find you unworthy, they could nullify my father's wishes. They might even send someone else to protect me, someone I do not trust." Her words carried a weight that Ethan couldn't ignore. He didn't know much about politics, but he could tell that this wasn't just about him. Lyra's safety, and possibly her future, depended on his ability to rise to the occasion. "Fine," he said, standing up straight. "I'll go, but don't expect me to bow or use fancy words. I'll just be me." Lyra gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "That may be enough." The next day, Ethan and Lyra boarded a sleek Seraphin transport ship bound for the Galactic Council's headquarters. Ethan had never been on a vessel so advanced. Every surface gleamed with metallic precision, and the hum of the engines was barely audible. As they approached the massive space station that housed the council, Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The station was a masterpiece of engineering, a sprawling structure of glass and steel that sparkled against the darkness of space. "Remember," Lyra said as they prepared to disembark, "they will test you. Stay calm, no matter what they say." Ethan nodded, though his confidence was fading fast. As the ship docked and the doors slid open, he stepped out into the grand hall, where dozens of alien delegates turned to stare. The silence was deafening. Then the whispers began. "A human? Really? King Alvaran must have been desperate." Ethan clenched his fists but kept walking. Beside him, Lyra straightened her posture, radiating the dignity of royalty. Whatever happened next, Ethan knew one thing. He couldn't let her down. Not now. Not ever. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was nothing short of magnificent. Towering pillars made of shimmering crystal stretched toward a vaulted ceiling, while holographic projections of the galaxy rotated in mesmerizing detail above. Ethan felt like an ant in the presence of giants. Every step he took echoed loudly, making him painfully aware of how out of place he was. Beside him, Lyra walked with calm confidence. Her long white gown flowed behind her, and her golden eyes stayed fixed ahead, ignoring the murmurs and sneers of the delegates. Ethan, on the other hand, could feel every gaze burning into him. That's the human. How pathetic. A mechanic, of all things. Surely the king's daughter deserves better. Ethan gritted his teeth but said nothing. He knew reacting would only make things worse. Lyra had warned him about this, but hearing the disdain firsthand was harder to stomach than he'd expected. As they reached the center of the chamber, the murmurs died down. A tall figure with pale green skin and intricate robes stepped forward. Councillor Valthor, a longtime rival of the Seraphim, stood at the podium with a sly grin. "Ah, the honored guests have arrived," Valthor said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Princess Lyra, welcome. And the human." He looked Ethan up and down as if assessing a broken tool. How quaint. Ethan crossed his arms, refusing to be intimidated. "The name's Ethan," he said flatly. "You could at least get that right." A few gasps echoed through the hall. Lyra shot him a subtle warning glance, but Ethan held his ground. If they wanted to ridicule him, he wasn't going to make it easy. Valthor's grin widened. "Ethan, is it? Fascinating. Tell us, human, what qualifications do you possess to serve as guardian to someone as distinguished as Princess Lyra?" Ethan hesitated, glancing at Lyra. She gave him the slightest nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. "Honestly, I don't have the qualifications you're probably looking for," he admitted. "I'm not a politician or a soldier. I don't have fancy titles or noble blood. But I do know how to fix things, machines, ships, and maybe even situations like this one." A wave of chuckles spread through the crowd. Valthor leaned forward, his expression smug. "Fix things, you say? How noble of you. And tell me, human, do you truly believe that makes you fit to protect a royal heir?" Ethan felt his frustration rising but forced himself to stay calm. "I don't know what King Alvarin saw in me or my family," he said, his voice steady. "But I know one thing, he trusted me. And I'm not going to let him, or Lyra, down." Lyra stepped forward then, her voice cutting through the tension. "Enough, Councillor Valthor. My father's decision is not up for debate. The bond between his family and Ethan's is older than most of the civilizations represented here. Mocking it only shows your ignorance." The hall fell silent. Lyra's words carried a weight that even Valthor couldn't dismiss. Ethan glanced at her, grateful for her support. But Valthor wasn't done. "Very well, Princess," he said with a mocking bow. "If you insist on trusting this human, then perhaps he can prove himself. Let him face the council's judgment." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" Lyra's expression darkened. "A trial," she said quietly. "They want to test your worth." Valthor clapped his hands. "Precisely. If the human is truly capable, he'll have no trouble completing a simple challenge." Ethan glanced at Lyra, unsure. What kind of challenge? Before she could answer, a large hologram flickered to life in the center of the chamber. It displayed a complex machine, an alien engine unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Parts were scattered around it, and strange symbols glowed on its surface. "This device," Valthor explained, "is a Seraphim relic. It has been broken for centuries. If you are indeed the skilled mechanic you claim to be, human, fix it." Ethan stared at the hologram, his mind racing. The design was utterly foreign, but he could see some similarities to other machines he had worked on. It wasn't impossible, just daunting. Lyra touched his arm gently. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "This is a trap." Ethan shook his head. "I might not have their respect," he said, loud enough for the council to hear. "But I know machines. Let's see if I can teach them a thing or two." The crowd murmured, and Valthor's grin faltered slightly. Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding but his determination unshaken. This was his chance to prove himself, not just to the council, but to Lyra and himself. Ethan stared at the holographic projection of the Seraphim relic. The alien engine looked like a puzzle designed by someone with too much time and not enough compassion. Its intricate parts glowed faintly with mysterious symbols, and wires coiled around its frame like snakes. The council chamber was silent, all eyes fixed on him. He stepped forward, his boots echoing against the polished floor. Lyra followed, her voice low but steady. "Ethan, you don't have to do this. The council set this trap to humiliate you." Ethan glanced at her and smirked. "I've been fixing machines since I was a kid. If this thing's broken, it just needs someone stubborn enough to put it back together. Lucky for them, that's my specialty." Lyra looked unconvinced but didn't argue further. Instead, she stepped aside as Ethan knelt in front of the hologram. A set of tools was provided by one of the council attendants, though the smirk on the attendant's face made it clear he didn't expect Ethan to succeed. Ethan examined the engine carefully. He didn't recognize most of the parts, but some mechanisms seemed familiar. A universal principle of machines ran through his mind. They all want to work. You just have to help them along. He began by isolating a set of wires that appeared burnt out. Pulling out a small diagnostic tool, he traced the current, noting where it failed. The symbols on the surface of the engine pulsed faintly, and Ethan realized they might be some kind of ancient code. "Symbols," he muttered. "Lyra, do these mean anything to you?" Lyra knelt beside him, studying the hologram. They're old Seraphim glyphs, used in early technology. This one, she pointed to a glowing character, means energy. And this one means connection. Why? Ethan grinned. "Because if we reroute this wire through the connection node here," he pointed to a panel on the side of the engine, "it might kickstart the energy flow. But I'll need you to translate the rest of these symbols to figure out the sequence." Lyra blinked, surprised. "You're asking me for help?" "Why not?" Ethan replied, already adjusting the wires. "You know your people's tech, and I know machines. Let's see if we can outsmart these council snobs together." For a moment, Lyra hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. Let's begin." The council watched in stunned silence as Ethan and Lyra worked together. Lyra translated the ancient glyphs while Ethan used his tools to reconnect circuits, bypass damaged nodes, and realign broken components. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he concentrated, his hands moving with practiced precision. "This can't be possible," muttered one of the delegates. "Humans aren't supposed to be this capable," another hissed. Councillor Valther's confident smirk began to falter. He leaned forward, his expression sour. "The human is just lucky," he muttered to an aide. "The relic won't fully activate. It hasn't in centuries." But Ethan wasn't focused on the whispers. He was in his element, the puzzle of the engine consuming his thoughts. Lyra's translations made the process smoother, and as they worked, he began to understand the flow of the design. The Seraphim weren't just engineers, they were artists. Every piece of the machine fit together with elegant precision. "Almost there," Ethan murmured, connecting the final wire. "Lyra, what's the last symbol say?" She studied it carefully. "It means balance. You must ensure the energy flow is perfectly even, or it will overload." Ethan adjusted a small dial, his fingers steady despite the tension in the room. With one final twist, he activated the engine. The glyphs on its surface flared brightly, and the machine hummed to life, a smooth, resonant sound that filled the chamber. The crowd gasped. The ancient relic, dormant for centuries, was functional once more. Councillor Valther's face turned pale. "Impossible," he muttered. Ethan stood, wiping his hands on his shirt. "Not impossible," he said, turning to face the council. "Just take someone who's willing to try." The room erupted into murmurs, some delegates clearly impressed, others furious. Lyra stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "The relic works because of our collaboration. This is what my father saw in humanity, the ability to adapt, to problem solve, and to work together. Ethan glanced at her, surprised by her praise. Before he could respond, a faint chime sounded from Lyra's wrist communicator. She checked the screen, her expression darkening. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked. "There's a security breach," she said quietly. "My personal quarters have been accessed." Ethan's stomach sank. Someone's trying to send a message. They don't just want to humiliate me. They want to hurt you. The tension in the air was thick as Ethan and Lyra hurried back to her assigned quarters within the Galactic Council's sprawling complex. The corridors, lined with glowing panels and shimmering alien architecture, seemed eerily quiet. Lyra's golden eyes scanned every shadow, her hand resting on a small device at her waist, a concealed Seraphim weapon. Ethan, meanwhile, was trying to keep his breathing steady. His instincts told him this was no ordinary break-in. Whoever had accessed Lyra's quarters wasn't there for valuables. This was personal. As they approached the door, the security panel flickered red, indicating it had been tampered with. Ethan knelt to examine it, his mechanical skills kicking in. "This wasn't forced," he said, frowning. "Whoever did this knew the system. They'd bypassed it cleanly." Lyra nodded. "The Council has spies everywhere. Someone inside is working against us." With a flick of her wrist, she activated a holographic shield that shimmered around them. "Stay close," she said. "We don't know what's inside." Ethan stepped back, letting Lyra take the lead. The door slid open, revealing a dimly lit room. Everything seemed untouched at first glance, but Lyra's sharp gaze immediately spotted the problem. Her belongings had been moved, subtly, but enough to notice. "They were looking for something," she whispered. Ethan walked to the small desk in the corner, his eyes scanning the surface. A faint shimmer of energy caught his attention. "There's a recording device here," he said, carefully picking up the tiny object. "They were spying on you." Lyra's jaw tightened. "It's more than that. They're sending a message. They want me to feel unsafe." Ethan placed the device on the table and leaned against it. "Who do you think it was?" "Valfor." "Likely," Lyra said, "but he wouldn't act directly. He'd use someone else to do his dirty work. The question is, what are they after?" As they spoke, a soft beep came from Ethan's pocket. He pulled out his small diagnostic tool and frowned. "There's residual energy in the room," he said. "Something's still active." Lyra tilted her head. "Can you trace it?" Ethan nodded, moving toward a shelf near the back of the room. His tool beeped louder as he approached a decorative vase. He carefully lifted it, revealing a small glowing device hidden beneath. "Looks like a transmitter," he said, "but it's not sending a signal anymore. Someone left this here, but it's been deactivated." Lyra examined it, her expression grim. "It's Seraphim technology. Old, but functional. Whoever placed it here had access to my people's resources." "That narrows it down," Ethan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just a galaxy full of suspects." Lyra almost smiled. "Perhaps, but this proves we're being targeted for a reason. They don't want us working together." Ethan stared at the device, then back at Lyra. "Why? What are they so afraid of?" Lyra hesitated, then spoke quietly. "My father believed in unity. He believed humans and Seraphim could achieve something greater together. That belief threatened the Council's power. If you and I succeed, we prove him right. And we expose their corruption." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "So they'll keep coming after us." Lyra nodded. "Yes, but we have one advantage." "What's that?" "You," she said simply. "They underestimate you." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by her words. For the first time since this ordeal began, he saw something different in Lyra's eyes. Trust. Before he could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the room. Both of them tensed, and Lyra moved to the door, weapon ready. Ethan grabbed a wrench from his belt, figuring it was better than nothing. The door slid open to reveal a council guard. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between Lyra and Ethan. "Princess Lyra," he said, his voice trembling. "You're needed in the council chamber immediately. There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" Lyra demanded. The guard hesitated. "It's Counselor Valfor. He's accusing the human of sabotaging the relic." Ethan's eyes widened. "What? That's ridiculous." Lyra's expression darkened. "Of course he is. He's trying to shift the blame." Ethan clenched his fists. "What do we do?" Lyra met his gaze, her voice steady. "We fight back. Together." As they left the room, Ethan felt the knot in his stomach tighten. The council wasn't just trying to discredit him. They were escalating the stakes. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Lyra trusted him, and together, they might just have a chance to turn the tide. Ethan followed Lyra through the winding halls of the Galactic Council's headquarters, his mind racing. Accused of sabotaging the relic. It was a bold and desperate move by Valfor, but it also meant they were getting too close to the truth. They needed proof of his schemes, and they needed it fast. As they reached a quieter corridor, Lyra stopped and turned to him. "If we're going to expose Valfor, we need evidence. He's hiding something, and I know where to find it." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're saying we break into his office? Sounds a little risky." Lyra's lips curved into a faint smirk. "Risky, yes, but necessary. He won't expect us to act so quickly." Ethan nodded, the gears in his mind already turning. "All right, what's the plan?" Valfor's private office was in a restricted area, guarded by layers of security. The first obstacle was a biometric scanner, but Lyra had come prepared. She produced a small device from her belt and pressed it against the scanner. The device emitted a low hum as it hacked into the system, and within seconds, the door slid open. Ethan whistled softly. "Remind me not to underestimate you." Lyra gave him a sharp look. "Focus. We don't have much time." They stepped inside, the room dimly lit by the glow of holographic displays. Shelves lined the walls, filled with artifacts and documents that screamed importance. At the center of the room was a sleek desk, its surface gleaming with holographic controls. "Start looking," Lyra said, already moving toward the shelves. "Anything that ties him to the sabotage or the break-in at my quarters." Ethan nodded and began rifling through the desk. Most of what he found seemed like standard council reports, but then he spotted a data crystal hidden in a small compartment. He held it up. "This looks important." Lyra glanced over. "Good. Let's see what's on it." She inserted the crystal into a portable reader, and a stream of encrypted files appeared. Lyra's fingers danced over the controls, decoding the data with practiced ease. As the files opened, her eyes narrowed. "Here," she said, pointing to a series of communications. "These are messages between Valfor and someone on the council. They're discussing the sabotage of the relic and targeting us." Ethan leaned over her shoulder, reading the messages. "Looks like they were trying to discredit both of us from the start. They even planted that transmitter in your quarters." Lyra's jaw tightened. "This is enough to confront him, but we need to be smart about it. If we present this without the right timing, he'll find a way to twist it." Before Ethan could respond, a soft beeping sound filled the room. Lyra froze, her eyes darting to the door. "Someone's coming." Ethan's heart raced. "What do we do?" Lyra grabbed the data crystal and slipped it into her pouch. "Hide." They both ducked behind a tall shelf just as the door slid open. Footsteps echoed through the room, and Ethan peeked out to see a figure in council robes entering. It wasn't Valfor, but one of his aides. The aide moved toward the desk, likely coming to check if anything had been disturbed. Ethan's breath caught as the aide's gaze lingered on the open drawer where he'd found the data crystal. The aide muttered something into a communicator, then turned to leave. As soon as the door closed, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was close. Lyra nodded, her expression grim. "They'll know we were here soon. We have to act fast." They slipped out of the office and back into the main corridors, keeping to the shadows. As they approached a central hub, Lyra stopped and turned to Ethan. "We'll need to present this evidence publicly," she said. "The council chamber is the only place where Valthor can't silence us without exposing himself." Ethan frowned. "You're sure about this? He's not going to go down without a fight." Lyra met his gaze, her golden eyes burning with determination. "I'm sure. If we don't stop him now, he'll destroy everything my father worked for." Ethan nodded, his own resolve hardening. "Then let's do it. Together." As they made their way toward the council chamber, Ethan couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. For the first time, they had the upper hand. And for the first time, he truly believed they could win. The Galactic Council chamber was packed, the murmurs of dozens of alien delegates creating a low hum of tension. Ethan stood beside Lyra at the center of the massive hall, the eyes of countless beings from across the galaxy fixed on them. Above, the grand holographic display of the Council's insignia loomed, casting an authoritative glow over the room. Councillor Valthor sat at his elevated podium, his smug expression a mask of confidence. He leaned forward, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We are gathered here today to address a matter of utmost importance. This human, Ethan Vance, has been accused of sabotaging a relic of Seraphin heritage." The murmurs grew louder, and Ethan clenched his fists. Lyra placed a calming hand on his arm. "Stay steady," she whispered. "The truth will win." Valthor continued, his tone dripping with disdain. "The evidence against him is compelling. His lack of sophistication and his species' primitive nature make such an act unsurprising." Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm. "I didn't sabotage anything. In fact, I fixed that relic, something your people couldn't do for centuries." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Valthor's eyes narrowed. A convenient claim, but easily refuted. You, a mere mechanic, would hardly understand the complexities of Seraphin technology. Before Ethan could respond, Lyra stepped beside him, her golden eyes blazing. "Enough, Councillor Valthor. Your accusations are baseless, and we have proof." The chamber fell silent. Valthor's smug expression faltered as Lyra produced the data crystal. She held it up for all to see. "This contains communications between Valthor and his allies. It reveals their attempts to sabotage not just the relic, but also my position, and the trust placed in Ethan by my father." A holographic projection sprang to life, displaying the incriminating messages. The delegates leaned forward, their murmurs turning into shocked exclamations. The messages detailed Valthor's schemes, including planting the transmitter in Lyra's quarters and orchestrating the sabotage to frame Ethan. "This is outrageous." Valthor sputtered, rising to his feet. "These accusations are fabricated." Lyra's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Are they? The evidence is undeniable. You sought to discredit me and the bond my father forged with humanity. Your actions are not just an insult to my people, but a threat to the integrity of this council." Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "You underestimated me, Valthor. You thought I was just a mechanic, easy to frame and humiliate. But here's the thing about humans. We don't back down when we're pushed." The delegates erupted into debate, some siding with Valthor, others calling for his immediate removal. The council leader, a towering figure with glowing eyes, raised a hand for silence. "This matter requires deliberation," the leader said, "but the evidence presented cannot be ignored. Councillor Valthor, you will be detained while an investigation is conducted." Valthor's face turned pale, and he glared at Ethan and Lyra. "This isn't over," he hissed. As guards escorted Valthor out of the chamber, Lyra turned to Ethan, a small smile breaking through her composed demeanor. "You handled yourself well." Ethan shrugged, his adrenaline still pumping. "I just told the truth. Besides, I couldn't let you face this alone." The council leader addressed them again. "Princess Lyra, Ethan Vance, the council will deliberate further, but your bravery and determination have not gone unnoticed. You may leave for now." As they exited the chamber, Ethan let out a long breath. That was intense. Lyra nodded, her expression softening. "You stood your ground, Ethan. My father would have been proud." He glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Thanks. But we're not done yet, are we?" "No," she said, her voice firm. "Valthor's influence runs deep. We've won this battle, but the war for justice is far from over." Ethan's smile widened. "Good. I've got plenty of fight left." For the first time, they both felt a sense of unity, not just as allies, but as a team bound by purpose. Together, they had faced the Council's scorn and emerged stronger. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were ready to take on whatever came next. The corridors outside the Council chamber were quieter now, the tension from the heated trial still lingering in the air. Ethan and Lyra walked side by side, their steps purposeful. The evidence they had presented had shaken the Council, but their fight wasn't over. Valthor's removal was only the beginning. As they reached a secure communication room, Lyra activated a holographic console. "We need to ensure the evidence against Valthor is broadcast across the Council networks," she said. "If his allies try to bury it, the galaxy will never know the truth." Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You really think the Council will let this go public?" Lyra's golden eyes hardened. "They won't have a choice. If the public learns what Valthor has done, the Council will be forced to act. Transparency is our greatest weapon." Ethan nodded, impressed by her determination. "All right. Let's make sure everyone sees it." Hours later, the Council delegates were summoned back to the Grand Chamber. This time, the atmosphere was different. The delegates seemed uneasy, their whispers tinged with uncertainty. Holographic displays around the room showed the evidence against Valthor, now available for all to see. The Council leader stepped forward, his imposing figure commanding attention. "The accusations against Councillor Valthor have been reviewed," he said, his deep voice resonating. "The evidence is clear. He has betrayed the trust of this Council and jeopardized the principles we stand for. Effective immediately, he is stripped of his position and will face trial for his crimes." A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. Some delegates looked relieved, others uneasy. Ethan glanced at Lyra, who stood tall and composed, her regal presence unshaken. The leader continued, turning his gaze to Lyra. "Princess Lyra, your bravery in exposing this corruption honors your father's legacy. Your actions remind us of the values this council was founded upon." Lyra inclined her head respectfully. "Thank you, honored leader. My father believed in unity and justice. I only seek to uphold those ideals." The leader's glowing eyes shifted to Ethan. "And you, Ethan Vance, have proven that humanity's contributions to this galaxy are far greater than we have acknowledged. Your ingenuity and courage have earned our respect." Ethan scratched the back of his neck, feeling out of place among the formalities. "Oh, thanks. I was just doing what needed to be done." The delegates chuckled lightly, and even Lyra's lips twitched into a faint smile. The tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a growing sense of hope. Later, as they left the chamber, Ethan and Lyra found themselves outside, under the vast expanse of stars visible through the station's transparent dome. The weight of the day's events slowly lifted, replaced by a sense of accomplishment. "You did it," Ethan said, turning to Lyra. "Your father would be proud." Lyra's expression softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself a genuine smile. "We did it, Ethan. Without you, this would have been impossible." Ethan shrugged. "I just fixed a few things and stood around looking tough." "You did far more than that," she replied. "You showed the Council and the galaxy that humanity is not to be underestimated." Ethan met her gaze, feeling a newfound sense of pride. "Well, I guess I had a good partner." Lyra nodded, her smile lingering. "Indeed you did." As they stood under the stars, a message chimed on Lyra's wrist device. She checked it and sighed. The council wants me to stay for further discussions. Rebuilding trust will take time. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And what about me? Lyra looked at him, her expression thoughtful. That depends. What do you want to do? Ethan glanced up at the stars, his mind racing with possibilities. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. I think I'll stick around, at least until we make sure the council's cleaned up. Lyra extended her hand, her golden eyes shining with gratitude. Then let's continue this fight together. Ethan shook her hand, a determined smile on his face. Together. The stars above seemed brighter, as if the galaxy itself was watching their triumph. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, they felt ready to face it, together, as equals, and as a team that could truly make a difference. The Galactic Council chamber was quieter now, its grandeur no longer marred by tension and hostility. Delegates moved about with a sense of purpose, and the air was lighter, filled with the hope of change. Ethan stood at the edge of the room, watching the proceedings with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. It had been a long road, but the fight was finally over. Lyra approached him, her regal posture as poised as ever. The council has agreed to implement reforms, she said, her tone softer than usual. Valthor's allies have been removed, and new safeguards will prevent such corruption from taking root again. Ethan nodded, leaning against a marble pillar. That's good. You did it, Lyra. She tilted her head, her golden eyes warm. We did it. Don't forget, Ethan, none of this would have been possible without you. Ethan chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. I don't know. I'm still just a mechanic. Fixing problems is what I do. And you've fixed far more than machines, Lyra said. You've repaired trust, between our people, between me and this council. My father would have been proud. For a moment, Ethan didn't know how to respond. He'd never been one for grand speeches or lofty praise, but hearing Lyra's words filled him with a quiet pride. Well, he said finally, I guess I'm not leaving this mess behind just yet. Lyra raised an eyebrow. You're staying. Ethan nodded, a small smile on his lips. Yeah. If you're sticking around to make sure the council follows through, someone's got to keep your ship running. Lyra's laughter was soft, almost musical. I'm glad to hear it. The galaxy could use more people like you. Later that day, Ethan found himself back in his workshop on Ilara Prime. Despite the whirlwind of events, the familiar hum of machines and the scent of engine grease brought him a sense of comfort. He was tinkering with an old starship part when the door slid open. Lyra stepped inside, her pale blue skin glowing faintly under the workshop lights. She looked around, her elegant figure out of place among the clutter, but her expression was amused. You never stop working, do you? Ethan grinned. Old habits. Besides, this place keeps me grounded. She approached the workbench, her gaze falling on the piece he was repairing. And yet you've proven yourself capable of so much more. Ethan set the part down and looked at her. You know, I've been thinking. Your father trusted my family for a reason. Maybe it's time I figured out why. Lyra smiled, a rare softness in her regal demeanor. Perhaps it's because your family, like you, never gave up, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. Ethan nodded, the weight of her words settling in. I think I get it now. It's not about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about showing up, doing the work, and proving everyone wrong. Exactly, Lyra said. That's what makes humanity extraordinary. For a moment, they stood in silence, the connection between them unspoken but undeniable. Finally, Lyra straightened and handed Ethan a small device. This is for you. Ethan took it, studying the intricate design. What is it? A token of appreciation, she said. It's a Seraphim communication link. Wherever you go, you'll always be connected to me. Ethan grinned. So, no excuses for ignoring your calls. None, Lyra replied, a playful glint in her eyes. As the days turned to weeks, the changes they had fought for began to take root. The Galactic Council became a place of collaboration rather than division, and the bond between humanity and the Seraphim grew stronger. Ethan continued to work in his shop, but now his role extended beyond fixing machines. He was part of something greater. And Lyra, the daughter of a king, found herself relying not on her royal title, but on the trust she had built with a human who had proven that even the smallest spark could ignite a galaxy-wide change. Together, they had defied the odds, and though their paths might one day diverge, the legacy of their partnership would echo through the stars for generations to come.